You need to leave, now. Jordan hadn't even made it past the second step inside the branch when he felt the chill of suspicion slice through the air like a hidden knife. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't stolen. He hadn't even spoken. All he'd done was exist, in black skin, with confidence. The bank lobby was polished with pride. Marble floors stretched beneath his sneakers, every tile whispering a different language than the one he grew up speaking. Warm jazz played faintly overhead, meant to soothe, but to Jordan Sinclair, it sounded like a warning, you don't belong here. He paused at the door, brushed the rain off his gray hoodie, and tucked his phone back into his jeans. Just breathe, he told himself. You're not doing anything wrong. Inside, a woman in pearls glanced up from a leather armchair and blinked slowly. A man in a business suit pulled his briefcase closer. And behind the polished glass of the teller booths, the smiles flickered. Jordan approached the counter labeled Priority Client Services. His father had told him to go there. His name was on the access list. This wasn't some favor. It was his right. A young teller in thick mascara and a clipped bun tilted her head slightly. Can I help you? She asked, but her tone already assumed he'd gotten lost. Yes, I'm here to withdraw funds from an account. He slid a black folder across the counter, open to a laminated authorization letter with his name. Jordan Sinclair. I have secondary access. The teller barely glanced at the document. And where's the account holder? My dad set up the account for me. He's traveling. I have his ID. And the account's linked to my mobile banking. Her eyebrows lifted, but not in surprise, in disbelief. One moment. She walked off. Jordan stood still. Behind him, he heard the soft clack of security boots echoing across the marble. 10 feet away, behind a mahogany desk, the assistant branch manager leaned forward. I need you to monitor that young man. Yes, the one in the hoodie. The security guard, a broad-shouldered man with a badge and barely concealed boredom, nodded. You think it's a fraud case? I don't like the way he walked in. Confident. Too confident. The manager didn't say black, but he didn't need to. The subtext was louder than the music overhead. Back at the counter, Jordan looked at the clock. He was missing his physics class for this. His fingers tapped against the leather folder. The teller returned, holding a walkie-talkie she didn't bother to hide. I'm going to need you to step aside, sir, she said curtly. We're having some issues verifying the authorization. What kind of issues? Jordan asked, careful to stay calm. I've used this letter before. Her eyes narrowed. Please don't raise your voice. I'm not. Security, please escort him outside while we sort this out, she said into the walkie. We'll notify him when it's resolved. Jordan blinked. Wait, what? He stepped back from the counter as the security guard approached. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. For what? Jordan asked, his voice rising now, not out of defiance, but disbelief. I've done nothing wrong. There's a protocol. There's a bias, he snapped, and regretted it instantly. He could feel the room shift further. Now the stares weren't curious, they were loaded. The security guard placed a firm hand on Jordan's shoulder. Outside, now. The glass doors closed behind him with a cruel finality. Rain splattered against his sneakers. The cold hit his skin like judgment. He stood under the awning, arms crossed, wet hoodie clinging to his back. Inside, people were still watching him, through the glass, through their assumptions, through the centuries. He pulled out his phone and called the only number that ever made him feel safe. Dad? Hey, Jay, came the deep, steady voice on the other end. Everything okay? Jordan hesitated. Not really. I got kicked out of the bank. Silence. You what? They wouldn't even check the full authorization. They just called security. Like I was some criminal. A long breath. The kind his father took when he was holding back thunder. Where are you now? Still outside. Stay there. I'm 15 minutes out. Click. Jordan exhaled slowly. It wasn't the first time he'd felt underestimated. Not the first time someone looked at him and assumed he didn't belong. But it was the first time it happened in his father's institution. The irony burned more than the rain. Inside, the assistant branch manager was laughing softly with the teller. You handled that well, he said. Honestly, if I had $1 for every kid pretending to be someone's heir. They both laughed. The teller paused. Wait, did you say his last name was Sinclair? Yeah. Jordan Sinclair. The laughter stopped. The manager blinked. Then frowned. Sinclair. He turned to his computer. Opened the internal employee directory. Searched the name Garrett Sinclair. And there it was. President and CEO. Sinclair Financial Group, National Bank Division. Oh, shit. Meanwhile, Jordan stood under the gray sky, shoulders tight. He wasn't mad at himself. Not exactly. He was mad at every kid who didn't have a father like his. For every teen who got pushed out and didn't have the privilege to push back. The street shimmered with city light and rainfall. And then. A black BMW 760I pulled up slowly to the curb. Garrett Sinclair stepped out. 6'3". Navy wool coat. Black leather gloves. His presence wasn't loud, it was solid. Like marble. Like justice in motion. Jordan's heart jumped. He met his father's eyes. Let's go, Garrett said. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't ask what happened again. He simply walked toward the bank entrance, with Jordan beside him. And as the glass doors parted once more. It wasn't just the weather that changed. Mr. Sinclair. I didn't know. If someone had told me. You didn't ask, Garrett replied, voice cold as steel. Because you'd already decided what a 16-year-old black boy must be. The bank lobby was still, no longer polished pride, but frozen fear. Garrett Sinclair didn't walk in. He arrived. Like a verdict that had taken too long to come. Jordan followed behind him, shoulders hunched. But even soaked from the rain, his presence was no longer small. Now he had gravity. A receptionist rose instinctively. Yes, sir, can I help? Where is the assistant branch manager? Garrett asked, not slowing his stride. The woman glanced down the corridor, panic surfacing in her eyes. Conference room. End of the left wing. He nodded once. Stay here, Jordan. His son sat quietly on one of the lobby chairs. Everyone looked, but no one dared speak. The teller from earlier caught his gaze, her lips parted, but no words came. Too late now. Inside the hallway, the assistant branch manager, Carl Weston, was leaning over a Keurig machine, casually stirring creamer into his cup when the air shifted behind him. He turned, and nearly dropped it. Mr. Sinclair. Garrett didn't speak for a beat. Didn't need to. His silence was louder than Carl's breathless stammering. I apologize for the incident earlier. If I had known it was your son. Garrett's eyes narrowed. That's the problem, Mr. Weston. It shouldn't have mattered whose son he was. Carl went pale. It was a misunderstanding. I'm sure the teller didn't mean. Don't finish that sentence. Garrett stepped forward. His voice, always measured, now carried the sharp precision of a blade. My son came here with legal documents, valid ID, and authorization. And yet your staff decided suspicion outweighed all of it. Why? Carl glanced nervously down the hallway, then lowered his voice. Mr. Sinclair, if you give me a moment, I'll pull up the file. We're past files. Garrett turned, walked back toward the main floor. Jordan looked up as his father returned. Come with me, Garrett said quietly. Together, they approached the teller window again. The same woman who dismissed him was still standing there, frozen. Garrett's eyes didn't waver. Your name? She swallowed. Tasha. Last name? Gibbons. Tasha Gibbons. Tasha, he said slowly, you refused to process a standard withdrawal request. Do you know how many violations that entailed? I followed policy. Then you don't know your policy. She flinched. Carl Weston arrived behind them, still out of breath. Sir, we've addressed this. I've told Tasha we'll do additional training. Garrett raised a hand. You're not listening. This isn't about training. This is about a culture. The room hushed again. Even customers stopped pretending to be interested in their phones. A culture, Garrett continued, where you look at a black teenager in a hoodie and don't ask yourself, how can I help? You ask, how fast can I get him out? Jordan looked down. Garrett placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. My son is 16. He's one of the top math students in the state. He volunteers every other Saturday at a food pantry. He's never once overdrafted an account. He looked back at Carl. And you treated him like a thief. Carl fidgeted with the corner of his blazer. Sir, I want to extend my deepest apology on behalf of the branch. No, Garrett said calmly. You don't get to use behalf until you prove you deserve it. A silence fell that no corporate manual had ever prepared for. Behind them, someone whispered, that's Garrett Sinclair. The CEO. The words moved like wildfire through the room. Heads turned. Phones were discreetly raised. Garrett turned to the front desk. Is your regional director in the building? A receptionist, shaking slightly, nodded. He's in his office upstairs. Do you want me to call? No need. He turned to Jordan. Come. The elevator ride up felt like a silent elevator down, a descent into accountability. Upstairs, in the executive suite, the regional director nearly fell out of his chair. Garrett. I didn't know you were visiting this branch today. I wasn't, Garrett said flatly. But your team invited me. The man blinked. What happened? Garrett gestured to Jordan. Tell him. Jordan hesitated. His voice was quiet at first. I came to withdraw money. They said I couldn't. Called security. Told me to leave. The director's mouth opened, but no defense came. Garrett leaned forward. If this is how you treat my son, what happens to black boys who don't have someone like me to walk in after them? No one answered. Fix it, Garrett said, standing. You have until close of business today to report back with a plan. Back in the lobby, word had spread. Some staff stood rigid. Others looked ashamed. The mood was no longer routine. It was a revelation. Jordan stood near the door, waiting for his dad. Then someone spoke. Hey, young man. It was an older woman, maybe 70, clutching a cane and a handbag. Her voice was gentle. You held yourself with dignity. Jordan gave a small smile. Thank you. I hope you don't let this make you smaller, she added softly. Because the way your father walked in, reminded all of us how we're supposed to stand. 15 minutes later, Garrett exited the bank with Jordan beside him. They didn't say anything for a while. The car was silent for most of the ride. Then Jordan finally spoke. "Why didn't you yell at them?" Garrett smiled faintly. "Because yelling makes you look small. And I don't yell when I already own the room." Jordan looked out the window. "They were never going to listen to me." "No," Garrett said. "Not today." "Then how do you change people who don't want to see you?" Garrett glanced at his son. "You don't change them. You change the system that allows them to act that way, without consequence." That evening, Garrett sat in his home office, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, coffee cold. He drafted a message to the entire bank chain. Subject: Policy isn't enough, culture is everything. Today, a black teenager was treated like a threat instead of a client, because bias walks faster than truth. That teenager was my son. But tomorrow, it could be yours. This institution cannot claim excellence while tolerating prejudice. We must demand better. By morning, every branch manager will receive a directive: review your staff's behavior, implement community accountability measures, and submit a real plan for anti-bias training that isn't just a checkbox. This isn't about one boy. This is about who we are. He signed the email. Garrett Sinclair, President and CEO. And hit send. The next day, news spread across internal message boards and industry channels. The video footage someone had discreetly captured went viral. Black teen kicked out of bank, turns out his dad runs it all. Outrage poured in. But so did admiration. This is leadership. Finally, someone with power using it right. That kid held his head high. That's the future I want my sons to see. The clip ended with Garrett walking through glass doors. And his son followed, taller than he'd ever walked before. The bank manager stood frozen, her finger hovering over the intercom. The regional VP had just told her who the man in the navy coat was. And in that moment, she realized. She hadn't just disrespected a teenager, she had embarrassed the most powerful man in the company, on his ground. The morning after the incident, the branch felt like it was holding its breath. The marble tiles still gleamed. The jazz still played softly. But the air had shifted. No one dared speak of the email. But everyone had read it. Tasha Gibbons, the teller who dismissed Jordan, sat at her station, hands folded, waiting for someone to tell her what would happen. Carl Weston, the assistant branch manager, had called out sick, but everyone knew he was just avoiding fallout. And the regional director, whose name appeared only on internal bulletins, was now walking every inch of the floor himself, as if sweeping shame out of corners. But shame doesn't leave that easily. At exactly 10:14 a.m., the doors opened again. And in walked Garrett Sinclair. Alone. No security escort. No PR handler. No advance notice. Just the CEO himself, in a fitted navy coat, polished shoes, and a presence that bent the air. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The receptionist, new, just a week into her job, nearly dropped her headset. "Mr. Sinclair, I didn't know you were coming," she stammered. "I'm not here for the press," he said evenly. "I'm here to talk. As a father. And as your leader." He walked past her, straight into the employee break room. There, he found 4 employees huddled with coffee mugs and half-eaten muffins. They froze as he entered. "Please don't get up," Garrett said quietly. "I just need 10 minutes. Silence. One woman, older, with gray-streaked curls and reading glasses, set her cup down. 10 minutes from you will be worth more than all the training we've had in 5 years. Garrett didn't smile. He nodded once and began. "What happened to my son last night wasn't new," he said. "And that's the problem." He paused. "Let it settle. I don't expect perfection. I expect integrity, judgment, and the courage to admit when we've internalized something ugly." He looked around the room. "I don't need you to tell me you're not racist. I need you to show me you know what bias looks like, and how fast it travels before truth can catch up." The young man in the corner with the bank tie and trembling knuckles asked, "So, what happens now?" Garrett looked at him. "You help me rebuild what trust costs." Downstairs, murmurs rippled as word spread, "He's here. And he's not leaving quietly." The regional director intercepted Garrett near the stairwell. "Sir," he said, already sweating beneath his suit, "we're implementing revised training modules. I'm scheduling implicit bias seminars across all locations." Garrett raised a hand. "Stop." The man did. "Training's not enough," Garrett said. "Not if it comes after the damage. We're already drafting a press response." "No press." "Not yet." "Then, what do you want?" Garrett stepped closer. "I want every employee in this building, every teller, every loan officer, every greeter, to hear from my son. Directly." The director blinked. "Your son?" Garrett nodded. "He's 16. But yesterday, he saw more about this company than I ever wanted him to. And I won't let his voice get buried under corporate statements." That afternoon, an emergency meeting was called in the lobby. Customers were politely asked to leave. The blinds were drawn. Chairs were arranged. And into the center of the room walked Jordan Sinclair. This time in a crisp button-up, slacks, and the same quiet dignity that had carried him through humiliation. He didn't read from notes. Didn't quote his father. He simply spoke. "My name is Jordan. I came here yesterday to take out $50 to buy a gift for my best friend's birthday. I had all the documents. I had done nothing wrong. But the moment I walked in, I wasn't a client. I was a question mark. A threat. A problem to be managed." He paused. "I'm not mad because I got kicked out. I'm mad because I know, if I weren't who I am, no one would have cared." The room was still. "And I'm here today because I do care. Because the next kid who walks in might not have a father who's the CEO. They might walk out thinking they were the problem." Jordan swallowed. "I won't let that happen. Not if I can help it." He stepped back. No applause. Just silence, thick, hard, humbling. Garrett walked up beside him and simply placed a hand on his shoulder. That was the standing ovation. The next week, Garrett personally launched a new company-wide initiative. The Walk-In Project. A live empathy training series featuring real stories from clients, employees, and youth, all recorded, all unfiltered. Mandatory for all personnel. Not just once. Quarterly. The first episode. Jordan's Story. Unedited. With a title that simply read, "I Walked In." In the weeks that followed, change didn't come easily. But it came. At the same branch where it all began, customers noticed new posters on the wall. "Empathy isn't optional. We see you. Every voice matters, even when it shakes." Tasha Gibbons, the teller, didn't lose her job. Garrett made that choice deliberately. Instead, she was reassigned to a community outreach unit, required to complete 60 hours of service in underserved youth banking programs. When interviewed by an internal newsletter weeks later, she said, "At first, I was angry. Defensive. But then I saw how fast I judged him. How I was afraid, not of him, but of what he represented. That maybe I wasn't as fair as I thought. I think, that's when the work began. Garrett declined press interviews. But the story didn't die. It grew. Harvard Business Review featured a write-up titled, "When Leadership Walks In, a CEO's Response to Everyday Bias." Time magazine listed him as one of the year's 100 most impactful executives. But Garrett never posted any of it. Instead, he pinned one note to the top of his private employee message board. "Every door your company opens must be ready to welcome, not to judge. Because the people who walk in may just be walking into a chance they've never had before." G.S. And Jordan? He went back to school. Finished his AP classes. Didn't let the attention change him. But something inside had shifted. One afternoon, Garrett came home to find Jordan at the dining table, surrounded by papers. "What's this?" he asked. Jordan looked up. "A proposal. For a banking app. For teens. Designed by teens. No judgment. No hidden fees. Just access." Garrett stared at his son, the future in his eyes. And smiled. "Let's build it." Jordan Sinclair. The panelist blinked, squinting at the name on the application. "This is the kid who got kicked out of his dad's bank." A pause. Another voice cut in, clear and low. "No. This is the kid who's about to change the way we teach financial literacy in this country." 2 months had passed since that rainy afternoon. Jordan Sinclair no longer walked with hesitation into rooms with marble floors. He walked with purpose. With fire in his chest. Not because he wanted revenge. Because he wanted reform. Garrett Sinclair had kept his promise. Not just to his son, but to every young person watching. He funded the Walk-In Project nationwide, converting the pain of one moment into a movement. Each participating branch had to host a live session with youth community members every quarter. No scripts. No corporate fluff. Just stories. Stories like Jordan's. But Jordan had something else brewing. It began one night at 2:17 a.m. Garrett woke to find light under his son's door. He knocked softly. J. Jordan was seated at his desk, surrounded by sketches, wireframes, and printouts of mobile app UI templates. On his screen was a presentation labeled, "Access, the teen banking app that treats us like adults." Garrett sat beside him, silent. Jordan turned the screen toward his dad. "This is what I want to build." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "What's different about this one?" Jordan leaned forward, eyes glowing. "It's not just for budgeting or balances. It explains why banks work the way they do. It shows credit building in real time. It uses plain English. And it has an AI feature that answers money questions without judgment, kind of like you, but without the suit." Garrett laughed. "You want to replace me with a chatbot?" Jordan smirked. "Only during business hours." 3 weeks later, Jordan presented Access to the National Youth Financial Innovation Summit, a pitch event featuring finalists from across the country. The audience? Investors. Educators. Lawmakers. Bankers. And most importantly, teenagers. Jordan stood on the stage wearing a navy blazer, not because his father told him to, but because he'd earned it. He began not with data, but with the story. "When I walked into my father's bank, I wasn't scared of numbers. I was scared of judgment. That I'd be seen as too young, too black, too unfamiliar with money to be taken seriously." A hush fell. "I want to build an app that meets young people where they are, without assuming what they're not." He clicked on a screen mock-up. It showed a feature called Ask Me Anything, where questions like, "What's a credit score? How do I buy my first car? What if my parents don't have a bank account? Were answered by a warm, voice named Echo. You don't need a 10-page contract to learn about overdraft fees, Jordan said. You just need clarity. And respect. The panel was stunned. But one judge, Angela Ruiz, head of the National Youth Banking Initiative, stood up mid-presentation. Son, she said, I've sat through 36 pitches today. Yours is the first one that didn't make me think of a product. It made me think of a promise. Jordan won first place. Not just a trophy, but a seed investment, mentorship, and a public feature in Forbes' Next Gen Z Innovators to Watch. But he didn't stop there. Garrett watched with quiet awe as his son held interviews, consulted with designers, and negotiated UX priorities with a product team that included adults twice his age. He's not building an app, Garrett said one evening to his board of directors. He's building access to something too many kids have been shut out of, respect. Meanwhile, the industry had taken notice. Other banks scrambled to implement youth outreach policies. Websites were updated. Stock photos became more diverse. But they were reacting. Garrett and Jordan were creating. At Sinclair Financial Group, Garrett pushed a revolutionary idea. Youth advisory panels in every region. A seat at the table, for 16 to 21-year-olds, to advise on mobile features, branch accessibility, and bias incidents. Some executives resisted. They're kids, one VP argued. What do they know about finance? They know what it feels like to be ignored, Garrett replied. And that's where change starts. It wasn't all easy. There were protests online. Bank CEO using son's story for PR boost. Is this real progress or just optics? Garrett refused to respond. He let the results speak. Access hit 100,000 downloads in its beta release. Retention rate, 91%. Top comment in the App Store. First time I felt like a bank didn't assume I was stupid. One Sunday morning, Jordan and Garrett visited the branch where it all began. The same lobby. The same floors. But a new mural hung on the main wall. The door you walk through should never decide how you're treated. Beneath it was a plaque. Inspired by Jordan Sinclair. Built by the community. Jordan stood still for a moment, reading it. You sure this isn't too much? He asked his dad. Garrett shook his head. You didn't ask for this. You earned it. Then a small voice piped up behind them. Are you Jordan? They turned. A boy, maybe 12, stood with his mother at the welcome desk. He wore a school uniform and clutched a piggy bank. Jordan smiled. Yeah, that's me. The boy looked at the mural. My school showed us your video. We made our banks in math class after that. I even taught my mom how to use the app. His mother nodded with tears in her eyes. I've been afraid of banks for 20 years, she whispered. But your son made me feel like, maybe we deserve to be here too. Jordan didn't know what to say. So he simply bent down and said, you do deserve it. Both of you. They smiled. And in that moment, Garrett saw it. His son wasn't just building a product. He was healing something broken. We have a situation. The voice on the phone crackled with tension. Access just hit 1 million users in 48 hours. A pause. And rival banks are starting to panic. At the head of the long boardroom table, Garrett Sinclair folded his hands slowly, then said the quiet truth that silenced the room. They're not panicking because of the numbers. They're panicking because a black teenager just disrupted their entire model of control. The private boardroom on the 47th floor of Sinclair Financial HQ was always a place of polished calm. Rich oak table. Frosted glass. Leather chairs that whispered legacy. But today, the atmosphere buzzed with something less comfortable. Disruption. 12 board members sat in uneasy silence as Garrett Sinclair entered, flanked by 2 department heads and a young executive assistant carrying a digital tablet that vibrated with fresh metrics. Garrett didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled just above the wrist, the way he always dressed when it was time to fix the future. "Let's not waste time," Garrett began. "You've seen the data." He tapped the digital display behind him. A screen lit up. Access, 1,036,492 downloads in 48 hours. App Store rating, 4.9 out of 5. Top downloaded financial app, US and Canada. Daily engagement rate, 82%. 18 to 25 demographic penetration, 63%. Gasps fluttered like moths across the room. "This was not a fluke," Garrett continued. "This is a revolution in how we approach financial trust." One director, a silver-haired man with a reputation for skepticism, raised a hand. "Let me ask the obvious question, who owns this? The app was developed by your son. Does that mean it's separate from Sinclair Financial? Or is it a subsidiary?" Garrett met his eyes. Access is not a side project. It's a fully integrated platform under our innovation wing. My son was the architect. Our team built it with him. It belongs to this institution. But public perception is in our favor, Garrett cut in. You know why? Because it wasn't engineered for optics. It was born from pain. And that's why people believe in it. Another board member spoke up. A competitor's VP just went on record calling Access a social experiment with no long-term profitability. Garrett smiled. Tell that to the 10,000 teens who've already linked real savings accounts through our system this week. He clicked again. Up came testimonial videos, raw, unedited clips from app users. "I opened my first account because Access made it feel like I wasn't being judged. I used the budgeting tool to help my mom pay bills. I finally understand what credit is. And why it matters." Tears pricked the corners of one executive's eyes. Then Garrett dropped the bombshell. "We're launching Access branches next quarter." The room stilled. "Branches?" a woman whispered. "Physical." "Yes," Garrett said. "Not traditional teller windows. We're calling them Access Studios. Interactive walk-in spaces. Open design. Co-learning labs. AI advisors on one side, human mentors on the other." Someone muttered, "That'll never work in rural states." Garrett nodded. "It must work in rural states. That's the point. Especially there." He took a breath and scanned the room. "Let me be clear," he said. "This is not a PR play. This is a cultural pivot." Then he walked to the window, hands behind his back, and said the words that no one in banking wanted to hear, but everyone needed to. "The future of finance won't be built by who holds the most wealth. It'll be built by who earns the most trust." Later that night, Garrett returned home, exhausted. The city sparkled beyond the balcony. But his mind didn't feel triumphant, it felt heavy. Progress had a cost. Jordan was still up. He was sitting on the floor in his bedroom, headphones around his neck, flipping through a journal with dog-eared corners. "You okay?" Garrett asked. Jordan nodded. "Yeah. Just thinking." Garrett sat beside him. "About what?" Jordan tapped the notebook. "About what happens when the app becomes bigger than the story. When people forget why we started." Garrett looked at him. "Then we remind them. Every time." Jordan leaned against the wall. Sometimes I feel like I broke something too big to fix. No, Garrett said softly. You revealed something too big to ignore. The next morning, headlines broke. Teen CEO inspired app forces big banks to rethink youth engagement. Sinclair's Access named most inclusive financial tech platform of the year. Competitors scramble as Access Studios announces nationwide. But not everyone was celebrating. In a high-rise across town, the CEO of a rival financial giant watched the news in silence. He turned to his legal chief. Find out if we can replicate this without the story attached. We can't compete with pain. But maybe we can bury it with polish. The legal chief hesitated. The difference is, people believe Jordan. I don't think we can fabricate that. The CEO's eyes narrowed. Then find a way to make people forget him. Meanwhile, back at Sinclair HQ, an unexpected visitor arrived. Tasha Gibbons. The former teller. She stood at the front desk, holding a small envelope. The receptionist recognized her instantly. Do you have an appointment? No, Tasha said. But I'd like to see Mr. Sinclair. Just for 2 minutes. Upstairs, Garrett stepped into the lobby and saw her. She looked nervous. Older, somehow. Worn from something internal. I don't want a job back, she said quickly. I came to say thank you. Garrett tilted his head. I was angry at first, she said. Thought I was being made an example of. But then. I worked with the youth team in Eastbrook. Taught 3 workshops. One girl asked me why I never smiled when people like her came into the bank. She paused. That question broke me. Garrett said nothing. Tasha extended the envelope. Inside is a donation. Small. First check I got from teaching that class. I wanted to go to Access. Garrett took it. Nodded once. Thank you. As she turned to leave, he called after her. Tasha. She turned. You changed, too. That matters. Tasha smiled, a real one this time. And for the first time in months, she walked away without guilt on her back. That night, Garrett wrote something in his journal, one he rarely shared, even with Jordan. Today, the woman who once dismissed my son, gave him her first paycheck. Not out of shame. Out of growth. If that's not justice, I don't know what is. In the shadows of all the data, growth charts, and media buzz, something even more important was happening. Human redemption. Access wasn't just changing banking. It was changing people. One lesson at a time. One voice at a time. One walk-in at a time. You don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? The voice on the phone was cold, calculated, and older than the systems it served. Access has become a threat. Not just to profits, but to control. And control doesn't die quietly. In the silence that followed, Garrett Sinclair knew. This wasn't just a movement anymore. It was a war for the soul of the industry. Access had exploded faster than anyone predicted. The beta launch had turned into a national rollout. 3 Access studios had opened in low-income communities, each packed with teenagers lining up to speak with mentors, ask questions, open accounts, or simply be seen. The app, once a prototype on Jordan's laptop, had now crossed 3 million active users. The media hailed him as a teen visionary. Educators called him a financial literacy prodigy. But not everyone applauded. Behind closed doors, the old guard was regrouping. In a Manhattan boardroom dimly lit by ambition and fear, a group of senior executives from 4 of the country's largest private banking firms met under confidentiality. No phones. No press. Just legacy. Access is bleeding us, one woman said, clicking through a slideshow of red arrows and falling youth engagement. Another, older man adjusted his tie. They're making banking emotional. Relational. That doesn't scale. Actually, a younger executive muttered, that's why it's scaling. The room fell silent. Then came the cold voice of the meeting chair, Miles Breyer, founder of a multi-billion-dollar institutional bank chain. Take it down, he said simply. Eyes turned to him. Smear campaign, one asked. No. Too obvious. Legal pressure. Better. Patent reviews. IP challenges. Regulatory scrutiny. We drown them in compliance before they can swim. Someone raised a hand. But what if Garrett pushes back? He's protected. Respected. Connected. Breyer smirked. Then we go after the boy. Back at Sinclair HQ, Jordan was reviewing new UI mockups for Access 2.0 when his phone buzzed. A notification. Then another. Then a flood. Is it true your dad rigged your funding? Crazy how fast privilege can look like genius. You didn't build Access. Your father bought it. Hashtag NepoBanker trending. He stared, confused. Then he opened his inbox, and found an anonymous tip. They're coming for your legitimacy. Be ready. That afternoon, Garrett's legal team barged into his office. There's been a formal request to freeze Access's beta expansion in 5 states, one said breathlessly. On what grounds? Garrett asked. Suspicion of a conflict of interest between your son and the Innovation Board. They're claiming nepotism, regulatory shortcuts, preferential treatment. Garrett stood, spine rigid. This is coordinated. Absolutely, his counsel replied. And it's only just started. At home, Jordan sat in silence on the porch. The sun was setting, but his thoughts were dark. He'd built Access from truth. From pain. From purpose. And now, they were calling it a lie. Garrett stepped out beside him. Jordan didn't look up. They're saying I didn't earn it. They're afraid you did. A pause. I shouldn't have used your name. You didn't, Garrett replied gently. They did. Jordan finally met his father's eyes. What if they shut us down? Garrett took a deep breath. Then we make so much noise they wish they never tried. The next day, Garrett and Jordan called a press conference. No suits. No stage. No podium. Just a community center gymnasium. Folding chairs. Kids. Mothers. Mentors. Truth. Garrett stepped forward. They're saying we cheated. That we bypassed their rules. That we had an unfair advantage. He looked around the room. They're right. A murmur. We did bypass their rules. Because their rules were designed to keep people like you out. He pointed to the crowd. To the girl who was told she needed a cosigner because her last name sounded too foreign. To the boy who was asked if his cash was gifted, not earned. To every family who walked into a bank and felt like they were trespassing. Garrett's voice rose. Access was never about breaking the system. It was about replacing it with something better. Then Jordan stepped up. He didn't raise his voice. But it carried. They're calling me names. Saying I don't deserve this. That my story is convenient. That I'm being used. He paused. Here's what they don't get. My story didn't start when I walked into that bank. It started the day I realized people would always see me as less, until I proved I was more. He looked into the cameras. I didn't ask to be a symbol. But now that I am, I won't let anyone erase the truth we built. The video went viral. Again. But this time, the momentum was different. Access users began to post their own stories. TikTok. Tweets. Testimonials. This app taught me more in a week than school did in a year. They said it was a gimmick. But it gave me dignity. I'm #WithJordan. The tag trended for 6 days straight. But Garrett knew public support wasn't enough. He needed legal force. Policy allies. And so he made a call. Senator Deshaun Marks, chair of the Financial Equality Caucus, met Garrett in D.C. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," the senator said. "I didn't stir it," Garrett replied. "I just turned on the light." Marks smirked. "Fair. You want protection for access. I want oversight of them," Garrett said. "Investigate why their systems are built to suppress disruption. Ask who's benefiting from stagnation." Marks leaned back. "And you want to testify?" Garrett shook his head. "No. I want Jordan to testify." The senator raised an eyebrow. "He's 16. Garrett smiled. "Exactly." Weeks later, Jordan stood before a congressional subcommittee. His voice was steady. His eyes, sharp. Access didn't threaten banks because it failed. It threatened them because it succeeded by trusting the kids. By trusting communities who were never invited into the room. He held up a printout. "This is a message from a girl in Mississippi. She said, for the first time, I feel like my voice matters in money." He looked at the panel. "If that's dangerous, then maybe it's the system that's broken, not the story." The room erupted in applause. Even seasoned staffers wiped tears. And across the country, something shifted. Banks started calling Jordan. Not to sue. But to collaborate. Behind closed doors, some enemies backed down. Others doubled down. But the truth had already escaped the cage. You can't stop a story that belongs to the people. Access became more than an app. It became a promise. A movement. A mirror. And Jordan Sinclair. He wasn't just a teen anymore. He was the standard by which progress would be measured. The principal looked down at the email again. "We're requesting that Jordan Sinclair deliver the keynote speech at the Global Youth Summit on Economic Inclusion," it read. He blinked. Then whispered aloud to his assistant. "A high school junior is being invited to address the UN next month, about banking reform." And somewhere in the back of his mind, a deeper thought surfaced. This isn't about a speech. This is about a shift in who gets to define the future. When Jordan walked into the community library that Tuesday afternoon, he thought he was just coming to help tutor kids on how to use the budgeting tool on Access. What he didn't expect was that the mayor of the city would be waiting for him, along with 3 reporters, a film crew from a national documentary team, and a smiling woman in a hijab who introduced herself as Zara Siddiqui, a youth development specialist from the United Nations. She extended her hand. "We've been watching you." Jordan froze. "That sounds intense." She laughed. "Not like surveillance. Like admiration." He blinked. Zara continued, "We'd like you to deliver the keynote for the Global Youth Summit on Economic Inclusion in Geneva next month. And no, your dad can't go on stage with you." Jordan's heart thudded. Hard. He looked toward Garrett, who stood across the room, talking to a group of parents. Zara leaned in. "You've already changed the system from within. Now we want you to challenge it from the outside." At dinner that night, Jordan pushed the rice around on his plate. He hadn't said much. Garrett finally spoke. "I heard." Jordan looked up. "It's surreal. Garrett smiled. You deserve surreal. But what do I even say? I'm not an economist. I'm not a policy expert. Garrett leaned forward. You're something more dangerous than both of those combined. Jordan raised an eyebrow. You're a witness. And witnesses tell the kind of truth that charts can't. In the weeks that followed, the Access team expanded. Not just in the app, but in influence. 3 major universities added Access case studies into their financial ethics curricula. Youth in Lagos, Nairobi, and Mumbai began using the app through beta mirrors translated into local dialects. High school seniors in Ohio and Arkansas started chapters called Access Advocates, helping immigrant families learn how to bank securely. And yet, with growth came responsibility. Jordan began to feel the strain. He missed sleep. Missed some classes. Missed just being 16. One night, while preparing for the UN summit, he found himself sitting in the dark on the back porch, laptop open, but screen blank. Garrett came out quietly, 2 cups of tea in hand. Jordan took one, sipped, then said, "Do you ever feel like the story's outgrown the storyteller?" Garrett paused. Then answered with the calm of a man who had walked through fire in silence. No. But I've often felt like the world was too small for the truth I was carrying. He placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. And in those moments, I reminded myself, it's not about being ready. It's about being real. Geneva. The UN headquarters. The ceiling of the main chamber shimmered with waves of painted color, like the sky had dipped low enough to listen. Jordan stood backstage, heartbeat loud in his ears. Zara squeezed his shoulder. You okay? He nodded. He was introduced not as the son of a CEO, but as the founder of a global movement redefining financial dignity. He stepped to the podium. Thousands of young leaders, heads of state, CEOs, press. Silence. Jordan adjusted the mic and began. I was kicked out of a bank before I had the chance to prove who I was. I was told to leave because of how I looked, how old I was, and what they assumed I wasn't capable of. But what they didn't know was that the bank they pushed me out of, it was the one my father led. That day wasn't the beginning of my shame. It was the beginning of my clarity. Because I realized something terrifying. If I could be erased so easily, what happens to kids who don't have someone powerful behind them? He paused. I built Access not because I wanted to make an app, but because I wanted to make room. Room for us to ask questions without fear. Room to learn without being humiliated. Room to exist in the economy as equals, not as afterthoughts. He stepped back from the podium slightly. This isn't just about money. This is about belonging. And if the financial world doesn't learn how to make space for the people it once ignored, then the people will learn how to build something without them. A beat of silence. Then applause. Rising. Crescendoing. A standing ovation. The clip went viral globally. Jordan Sinclair, 16, standing in a blazer and jeans, telling world leaders the truth they'd buried in spreadsheets. Back home, Garrett received an anonymous letter. Handwritten. Your son reminded me of something I forgot. Money without empathy is exploitation. Thank you for raising him with both. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, a young black woman named Melanie Rains, a college junior who'd once been denied a business loan for her food truck idea, watched Jordan's speech through tears. She opened her phone, downloaded Access, and used the Business Builder tool to run her first projection. She smiled. Typed. My dream is no longer a napkin sketch. It's real now. Thank you, Access. In Kansas, a white father whose teen son had dropped out of school watched the clip and turned to his boy. "Have you ever thought about getting your GED?" The son shrugged. Then said, "Can I try that banking app first? The one that kid made?" The ripples weren't just viral. They were visceral. Because what Access had created wasn't just innovation. It was an invitation. One night, as Jordan sat at his desk, this time not overwhelmed, but clear, he opened an email from the head of a private prep school in D.C. "We'd like to name our new student finance center after you. You've helped students trust systems they were raised to fear." Jordan smiled. Then wrote back. "Name it after all the kids who never got let in. Call it the door. Because that's what this whole thing has always been about." The stage was set for a national award ceremony. Dozens of spotlights. 1,000 seats. A velvet podium. And behind it all, a screen that simply read, "Youth Architect of the Year, Jordan Sinclair." But backstage, as the applause thundered and the world waited, Jordan wasn't standing in awe. He was pacing. Wrestling with the one question even he hadn't answered yet. Was Access his greatest act, or just the beginning of something far greater? The event was broadcast live on PBS and streamed in 27 countries. The room was filled with senators, CEOs, educators, and students flown in from all over the country. Garrett sat in the front row, suit crisp, expression calm. But anyone who knew him could see the flicker of nerves behind his eyes. Not fear, but reverence. The host approached the mic. "Tonight, we honor not just an innovator, but a young man who has given voice to a generation too often overlooked in the halls of finance." She paused, looked directly into the camera. In a world that once pushed him aside, he built a door, walked through it, and held it open. Cheers erupted. "Please welcome, Jordan Sinclair." Jordan stepped onto the stage in a black blazer and charcoal gray jeans, unfussy, grounded. He didn't raise his arms. Didn't wave. He simply looked at the audience. And exhaled. Then he spoke. 3 years ago, I stood outside a bank in the rain. Not because I'd done anything wrong. But because someone decided I didn't look right. A hush swept the room. Back then, I thought what hurt the most was being thrown out. But now I realize what hurt more. I was realizing how normal that moment felt. He stepped forward slightly. Access was born not out of ambition, but out of exhaustion. I was tired of seeing kids like me treated as suspicious before being treated as human. I was tired of systems where worth was measured in inheritance, not intention. And I was tired of waiting for permission to matter. He took a slow breath. When we launched Access, we weren't just building a tool. We were building dignity. And what we found? Was it that people had been waiting for that dignity longer than we knew? He clicked a button. A screen lit up behind him, a mosaic of faces. From a girl in Ghana using Access to open her first microloan account. To a young trans teen in rural Alabama who started a community savings circle through the app's co-op feature. These are not statistics, Jordan said. They're seeds. He paused again. Then said what no one expected. Tonight, I'm not announcing an upgrade. I'm announcing an exit. Gasps rippled across the room. I've decided to step away from Access. Confusion bloomed. Jordan raised a hand. Not because I'm done. But because Access was never meant to be mine. It belongs to every kid who never had a seat at the table. It belongs to communities still seen as risk instead of potential. He smiled softly. And I believe that to truly let something grow, you have to let go. The applause was slow at first. Then steady. Then soaring. Garrett closed his eyes for a moment. And smiled, the kind of smile only a father can understand. After the ceremony, Jordan stepped into the night air alone. Cameras flashed behind him. Offers buzzed on his phone, fellowships, think tanks, media tours. He ignored them all. Instead, he walked 2 blocks down the avenue and sat on a bench at the edge of a park. A voice startled him. "You always sit in the quiet after the storm." He turned. It was Melanie Rains, the food truck entrepreneur from LA, now running 3 locations and mentoring other women in the Access network. Jordan smiled. "Only when the storm taught me something worth sitting with." She sat beside him. "I saw what you did tonight. That was bold." He shrugged. "Felt right. You think Access will be okay without you?" "I think it'll be better. Because now it belongs to everyone. And people protect what they feel part of." Melanie nodded. Then handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was a menu. From her newest food truck. At the bottom was a note. "Sponsored in full by my first Access loan." In the months that followed, Access transformed into a cooperative model, led by a diverse board of youth, activists, single mothers, community leaders, and educators. Jordan declined every board seat. He remained involved only as a listener. Instead, he launched a new initiative. The Listening Room, a traveling storytelling hub that hosted forums in underserved towns and cities, where people could share experiences with money, exclusion, and hope, anonymously or openly. He believed that before you solve a problem, you listen to its heartbeat. And Garrett? He stepped back, too. He mentored quietly, wrote policy quietly, and helped shape legislation that required all national financial institutions to include accessibility audits and bias training co-designed with former Access users. One lawmaker joked, "You two just made empathy a compliance requirement." Garrett didn't laugh. He just said, "About time." 2 years later, on a warm spring day, Jordan returned to the bank branch where it all began. Not as a speaker. Not as a symbol. Just, as a person. The same branch now had new signs. "No assumptions beyond this point. You are more than your balance. Welcome, human." He walked in, nodded at the new manager, a formerly unhoused mother now leading a staff trained directly through the walk-in project. She recognized him, but said nothing more than, "Good to have you back." And that was enough. Outside, Garrett waited. "How'd it feel?" Jordan looked at the sky. "Like we turned a wound into a window." They stood in silence. Then Garrett put an arm around his son. "You ready for whatever's next?" Jordan looked forward. "I think I've finally realized, next is wherever the need is." Years later, when history books wrote about Access, they didn't just list figures or growth charts. They quoted words. Words Jordan once scribbled in a notebook at 16. "Power is not what you build for yourself. Power is what you leave standing when you walk away." And beneath that, a single phrase. Written in small, humble ink. "I built a door. And left it open." What if the world judged you before it ever heard you speak? Jordan Sinclair didn't plan to become a symbol. He just wanted to be treated with respect. But when he was pushed out of a bank simply for looking like he didn't belong, he didn't shout, he built a solution. Access wasn't just a financial app, it was a door. A door for teens, for single moms, for the overlooked, the unheard, and the underestimated. This story reminds us that real change doesn't come from power alone, it comes from the courage to use it differently. Jordan didn't conquer the system. He invited others to help redefine it. And in doing so, he proved a simple truth: dignity should never be a privilege, it should be a given. No matter who you are or where you come from, your voice matters. Your presence matters. And when systems forget that, it's up to us to remind them, not just with protests, but with purpose, with compassion, and with action. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Help us keep opening doors for voices the world still tries to silence. Because sometimes, the most powerful revolution starts quietly, with someone simply refusing to walk away.